So let's say from a scale of 0 being fully people, 10 being data, I lean very heavily towards like the data. So maybe like 8.5 to 9. The biggest struggle there was, juggling human with also numbers. But those two, they don't have to be so polarizing to each other. When it comes to discussing business, there's no wiggle room for that, unfortunately, when it comes to the service industry.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Service Business Show. Today, I have a very good friend of mine, Paolo. I'm not going to introduce you, so maybe you can give everyone an introduction of who are you and then what do you do?
Okay. Hi, my name is Paul. I've known Jingjing since 2018 when we were both kind of relatively new to the service industry. So I met her when I was interning at a cleaning startup, and then our both of our companies were actually partners there because Helpling was the platform. And then currently, I am working for Helpling, the cleaning services platform here in Singapore. I head up the customer experience team, and am also heading up the one of the growth businesses that we are kind of staking our bets on, which is elderly care. So I've been in the startup space and generally service B2C space for my entire career, actually. So since 2018, there was that cleaning gig. Afterwards, I decided to go into co-living, which is also B2C and very, CX oriented as well. After that, I had a short stint in kind of B2B software sales, which then didn't really last. I got kind of bored and I decided to go back into the startup world. So here I am at Helpling. Yeah.
I think I was very excited to have you over here because out of everyone I talked to, right, you have a real experience in really operating a traditional cleaning startup and but with tech enabled. I was tech enabled. I would say you're probably one of the few people who have this like tech enabled operator kind of mindset. So let's from the start. So when I first met you, you were an intern and you were still in school back then, right? And then you were finishing your master degree. Why did you choose to go to a cleaning business?
Well, most of my cohort during the masters, they wanted to get into kind of these prestigious careers afterwards, like management consulting, banking, or take the safe route of going to an FMCG. I wasn't necessarily looking at, you know, the industry or kind of, well, yeah, the industry that I wanted to get into. Rather, I was more interested in finding a place that would allow me to apply theory to practice. So it didn't necessarily matter what industry I got into. I was learning all these modules on operation management, change management, finance, etc. All of that would get thrown out the window if I am just another cog in the machine in, a larger company.
Yeah.
And it didn't sit well with me that I would be working on something that I don't see the end result of. So
Yeah.
that's why I decided to take that opportunity with that first internship. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think you hit a gold mine comparing
Oh
with all
yeah.
your yeah? Why do
Yeah,
you
for sure.
Okay, so obviously I'm a fan of the service industry, right?
Yeah.
I think if I just keep telling people that, look, this is a gold mine, people would be like, ah, yeah, sure, she's like in the industry. But okay, from someone who's also in the industry for the same amount of time as I do, why do you think the service industry, especially, cleaning, plumbing, home services, is a gold mine?
Well, so to begin with, I guess as an example, right? When I was working in co-living, that's a very operations heavy kind of service in order to run all those flats and service all those people, keep them maintained. And the biggest problem that we had there was that we couldn't, for the life of us, find a full-time industry service worker to work for us in that startup. their reasoning being, if I work for you, I'm gonna earn way less than if I worked for myself. As in, like, these people were earning a lot of money just doing their freelance work and not even doing it through, um, kind of modern tech channels. Like they don't
Yeah.
advertise on Google, etc. But the amount of business that they were receiving and their markups were ridiculous. So
Yeah.
obviously there's something there. It's just that the market is very fragmented and someone is yet to kind of incentivize these individuals into, you know, committing to.
Yeah, I was hearing some there's quite a few handymen that I talked to previously in Singapore. They're freelance and they're making about 25. Yeah. I was like, "Uncle, good on you. Keep doing what you're doing." He's like, and then so I remember initially I was trying to get him to work with Helpling, right? And he was like, "Can you pay me I'm not asking you to pay me a lot, just like maybe 27K." And I was like, that's bigger than my salary. Wow.
Yeah.
But I'm also happy, right? Because traditionally people think it's a blue collar worker job. But nowadays, because all the fresh grads, they're looking into white collar job. And then so the supply for these blue collar workers are getting less and less. So that allows, because, basic supply and demand, that allows people to earn a lot more, which I'm happy. But do you think the supply can be solved, let's say in maintenance, right? Or even elderly care side? There's a lack of supply. Do you think this can be solved by, the government boosting more quota, or do you think training can actually solve it better?
So I think if we're speaking in the context of Singapore, right, it would be quite difficult, in my opinion, to try to get, a university graduate to pursue that as a career,
Mm,
simply because of the fact that um, industry wise, the pay isn't attractive enough.
mm,
So the supply of locals might be a bit difficult to come by unless it's really something that they're quite passionate about. But
mm,
otherwise, the general trend of, graduates nowadays is, oh, I want to get into investment banking. I want to get into MNCs. I want to get into tech because it provides me a stable career with a high income so that I
mm,
can get my HDB, et cetera, et cetera.
mm.
As a kind of service and healthcare worker, those jobs, I mean, like you obviously know the statistics on this, are majorly filled by foreign workers, like from the
Yeah,
Philippines, from Thailand, from Indonesia, etc. Because the income that they would get here is higher than what they would get back home.
yeah,
But also their skill sets don't necessarily open them up to the occupations that, university graduates
yeah,
locally would have, like, tech, etc. So supply wise, I think it's going to continue to be, foreign dominated in terms of trying to fill that gap between supply and demand.
yeah, yeah. And how do you feel about, because if they're foreign workers, obviously the standard is a bit different than, Singapore standard sometimes. How do you train all of them in scale to ensure the quality is always consistent?
Okay, so, well, first off, I think quite a bit of quality is reliant on the quality of the candidate when they first come in before you've even trained them. So that's one key part of, I guess, the supply chain that we really need to take into consideration, because from my experience, hiring inexperienced individuals actually take up a significantly longer ramp up time in order to get them to the level that is acceptable for, our Singaporean market. Okay, so the unfortunate part about the home services space is the barrier to entry is so low.
Mm,
Like, I could technically pull together, a quota of 10 people and then go into the market and then be happy with whatever, I make from that. But the fact is, I'm able to do it without any barriers whatsoever. I can replicate whatever any competitor or another small business is doing. I think what the differentiator in the long term is actually who's going to be able to provide the most consistent level of service that is 100% reliable. Now, that challenge is definitely a challenge because of the nature of the supply as well. You're relying on foreign domestic workers whose contracts can expire, over 2 years. And there's also risk of them churning out because maybe their pass doesn't get renewed. And then you have
Yeah.
to start over from the ground zero. So
Yeah.
now, how do you then build a business that can kind of produce
Yeah.
talented and consistently high performing service industry workers, regardless of their experience? So a lot of it is going to have to go into the training, which is a significant amount of investment of any business. How do you lower those costs as much as possible? Yeah, that's pretty much it, I think, from my perspective, because people can continue to throw, tens of thousands of marketing dollars into making sure that their business is the most visible.
Yeah.
But I've always been of the opinion, because I used to be in sales as well. I don't like selling someone a promise and not following through on it. If I'm
Yeah.
spending, 100,000 marketing dollars, for example, and I'm telling the customer our service is the best, it better be the best. Otherwise, I've wasted that $100,000 on acquiring that customer.
Yeah.
So in the short term, the lowest spender maybe may lose the market share.
Yeah.
But in the long term, call me idealistic for this, right? Service and stickiness will triumph. And I think that a lot of my perspective on this also comes from the fact that, I grew up in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, the most used services there aren't marketing themselves. Their customers are doing the marketing for them because consistently over decades and decades, these companies have provided that excellent level of execution.
Yeah.
Right? So how do we get to that level with the lowest cost possible? Who knows? Right?
With tech. With tech, you can put some there's tons of AI training tech out there, no? Have you
Yeah,
have you looked through them?
yeah. Now the question is, for example, our supply are from Myanmar, right?
Yeah.
How do you get them to be
Understand.
tech literate?
Yeah. You can.
Right? And how do you guarantee that what they learn from the tech platforms, which I'm assuming primarily comes from media or text, translates into
Yeah. Yeah. I think training is one part, right? Another part is that you have to kind of watch out for their performance consistency and then
Yeah.
so that the clients will stick with you. So how do you kind of decide, okay, this worker is not good. Let's call him or her for counseling versus, okay, it's time for you to go.
So I think basically every single company has some form of performance management system for their workers, right?
Yeah.
But if you want to kind of get a quick and dirty look at it, let's say we have worker A. They make about 5,000 revenue on a monthly basis, and then the delta or variance in their graph is not crazy.
Yeah.
That's definitely a consistent worker. And then you could see, for example, how many relationships that worker has with, like, how many customers they currently have, and if and how many they've had historically versus how many they have active. The delta between those two should be as small as possible, and therefore this person is definitely consistent because nobody wants to let them go. But then when you get, wild variance, it's all data. Then you can see, okay, this person's really no good. I need to call them in, and then if they don't stabilize in X number of months, then it's just not sustainable because the amount of money I'm spending on a full-time headcount to manage this individual is actually costing me more.
Yeah.
It's not just the business, the losses you're incurring on them churning customers. You're losing resources on, the team that you have to build around dealing with those inconsistencies, which is why, like, I think the offline service quality, if it's fixed, you don't really need a team anymore to manage any defects. You can minimize the amount of full-time headcount that you would need to clean up the problems that should have been prevented in the first place. Yeah.
But we all know people have people's problem, right? Do you think people's problem is better to be solved by another person? Or you think that as long as they're trained well, eventually you don't need that.
Okay. So I think that problem is multifaceted because you can have two types of people's problems, right? One is work ethic,
Yeah.
and then the other are uncontrollable circumstances. For example, their family member falls ill and they have to leave,
Yeah.
or they're heavily in debt and their family or etc. is in trouble. So external factors that affect their performance and internal factors which rely heavily on their character.
Yeah.
So if you have the training pat down and also the funnel
Hiring.
talent
Yeah.
hiring coming in, then the only variance that you need to account for will actually be those external factors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But also, a lot of times, some workers, they're very good with building relationship with their managers.
Mhm.
And even if they're not very good, you can overlook that. So in terms of spectrum, full data driven people management approach versus, on the other hand, full relationship driven management approach, where are you at and why?
Okay, so let's say from a scale of 0 to 10, like 0 being fully people, 10 being data, I
Yeah.
would I lean very heavily towards like the data. So that would be maybe like 8.5 to 9. That's also how I run my customer experience teams. Because work is work. When you are managing somebody, you can like them outside of work, but it doesn't matter if they're not giving you the numbers that you need, right? So, for example, let's pretend that I have a cleaner that I have a good relationship with. They're really a genuinely nice person, but their performance is not great. The performance will go first, and then the human will go after. Meaning to say, hey, let's pretend that you're my employee. Like, hey, Jing Jing, like your performance hasn't been great, and then blah blah blah. I go through the numbers with you to keep it as objective as possible, and
Mm-hmm.
then after that's done, outside of the work, then I'm gonna be like, oh, okay, like we're not working anymore, so yeah. So I will be your friend outside of work, but when it comes to discussing business, there's there's no wiggle room for that, unfortunately, when it comes to the service industry.
Do you think you have always been like this, very numbers driven, or you learned it from somewhere else?
I think I learned it. I learned it on the job over time because I didn't really have kind of like a formal induction into managing people. It was it's like get thrown into the water or drown kind of situation. And then the biggest struggle there was, juggling human with also numbers. But those two, they don't have to be so polarizing to each other.
Yeah.
You can still be like, this is why I'm upset with you, numbers.
Yes.
Because when you're like, this is why I'm upset with you, and then you give a human reason to it, it makes it a bit subjective and difficult to understand for both parties. So the common ground there is numbers. You understand? Okay, great. Let's move on and let's see how we can, fix it.
Do you think there's any courses in school that could teach people more about management that could help you? Let's say you don't have to feel like you're drowning, every single day when you put fires out.
I don't know that I learned any of that from my master's, like, at all. They teach you all of this, high level theory
Yeah.
that management consultants will, walk into the room and tell you, oh, this is why your team is performing very poorly.
Yeah.
But it doesn't teach you how to execute on it properly and enforce it. So a lot of what I learned was really from, the leaders that I've worked under. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you believe technology can eventually take over this part?
Of managing people?
Yeah.
No, not yet.
So if you were going to write a master business degree at business, curriculum, if you were going to teach a class based on your experience, this part that you mentioned, there's
Mm.
no curriculum in school that have taught you this. How would you write the curriculum?
Actually, the curriculum would be based quite a bit off of literature by, like, written by leaders. Because the curriculum
Interesting.
that they teach in masters degrees or just in school in general,
Yeah.
they're usually frameworks like off of Harvard Business Studies, blah, 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 blah. But then you also, those are applicable for those specific situations and they're prescriptive. You need something that teaches an individual how, like, what their management philosophy is like and what their leadership style is like, because then they can carry that onto any industry or any business situation regardless of, you know, their experience in that particular industry, right? So if hypothetically, for example, you ask me to jump into another industry right now and build a team from there, a lot of my, you know, management applications would largely be founded on how I manage here. It's just that I'm selling or building a different service, right?
Yeah. And whose literature would you include the most in this
Oh
textbook?
gosh, I have quite a few. I actually keep track of my readings. Hold on, let me pull it up.
Yeah, I do remember we
Uh,
used to exchange books,
yeah,
right? Remember that?
yeah, exactly. So in terms of management philosophy, I think one, like if I were to give someone a starting point, it would have to be the start with why philosophy with Simon Sinek. So that one was really powerful for me because when you're managing people, it's easy to pull rank, but you
Mm-hmm.
won't get the results that you need out of them if they're not bought into your idea or taken along in the journey as to why you're making those specific decisions.
Yeah.
So that would be a good starting point, I think, for anyone.
Start with why.
Yep.
Okay, got it. Got it. Okay, let's switch the topic a little bit. So, what do you think? So you've been in the service industry, right? And now I remember, I think last year you were running elderly care. So
Yep.
I was very curious, growing up in Japan, seeing so many elderly people there. How's the system there differently comparing with, let's say, Singapore or Philippines?
So I think compared to let's start from, I'm from Philippines, so this is gonna sound a little funny, but let's start from like the weakest to the strongest.
Oh my god, you're gonna rate this? Okay, let's go.
Yeah, so Philippines elderly care does not exist. It makes sense because it's a third world country. So largely the individuals that are able to have access to elderly care from the more upper middle class to affluent families, in which case it's private care that they
Mm-hmm.
have.
Mm-hmm.
There are care homes, but the bulk of them are government subsidized and highly under equipped, but at the same time also oversubscribed.
Mm.
So you see a lot of elderly people just aging, and then the care, the primary caregiver being their own family members, right?
Yeah.
And then you compare that to Singapore, where of course the government here is absolutely wonderful. I mean, you know that they have the people's best interests at heart. That's why they started the HSS back when you know, when you were working for Helpling, and that contributed largely to the boom in the business. And then why they also recently expanded the HSS to be in caregiving, because they acknowledge that there is going to be a growing shortage of care talent,
Yeah.
as well as kind of like an oversubscription in the care institutions here, right? Because they have those community centers, they have those private care homes, but it's still not enough. And then you have Japan, who's like, okay, their income tax and everything is absolutely crazy, but they have a high life expectancy for a reason,
Yeah.
right? So the government is highly invested in creating these kinds of care homes or care environments for elderly people. Actually,
Yeah.
in fact, Japanese people age very, very gracefully because of how much support they get from their government.
Yeah.
So when it comes to social care, like social welfare for elderly people there, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they have care workers assigned individually to each old person, and they do visits to their house. So a caregiver needs to be registered with an institute that the government is tracking, that it's like Jing Jing cares for Ms. Watanabe and Mr. You know, Yamamoto, and these are the elderly under her charge, and these are her charts, and she needs to make these visits on a regular basis. every single
Yeah,
week.
I see.
You
I see.
need to be registered. There's no freelance market there.
Right, right. And that kind of ensure the quality of caregivers, right? And then also
Yep.
obviously you kind of ensure the care every single elderly people they're getting. But do you think the same kind of quality can be enforced in Singapore?
If you have the supply.
Now you kind of have more supply with HSS, right? Do you think caregiving can be trained like how, like SOP, the training in like 2-3 days? How long do you think it needs?
There's a reason why I don't hire inexperienced caregivers for Helpling. Like these people need to have gone through that. You can
Yeah,
teach caregiving, but the reality of it is quite crazy. You're dealing with elderly people that whose children may or may not have time for them, but you're effectively babysitting for a full-grown adult with needs like showering, toileting, and everything. And that's not something that everybody would necessarily have a stomach for, right?
yeah, yeah.
So
So if that's the case, right? If you don't want to hire anyone who's like inexperienced, then that means even if they've gone through training, gone through courses, they cannot be hired right after that. Then what do you think is the right progression or training process for these for let's say Singapore to create more caregivers? You're not the only person telling me that you will not hire someone fresh, even if let's say they have 10 certificates.
if there's a like let's say I had a magic lamp, right? And I could
Yeah.
make a wish and there was unlimited budget. If the government is already kind of subsidizing these kinds of care institutions
Yeah.
to be able to address the growing elderly population in Singapore, they could send the fresh talent to those care homes to give them immediate exposure to a multitude of clients to immediately rack up that exposure. You could then start funneling, for example, the newbies into those care institutions, let them rack up the experience because they've already gone to certifications and trainings. And then once they have those experiences, then you can start kind of giving them some form of career progression where, okay, you're done here. Now you've been upgraded into a private caregiver for maybe like 20 different families that you visit on a weekly basis, right? Yeah.
Do you think this can be a standalone business, profitable business without government support? Just training caregivers and help them to level up.
I mean, there are companies that already do kind of those caregiving certifications, right?
Yeah, but nobody
But
will hire them right after, right?
yeah, there's no kind of like end to end where we will hire you, we'll train you, you'll get the practical experience, and then you go off to private families. That's a lot of capital investment. You're gonna have to build a care home.
That's true. That's true. And probably Singapore is not the best place. Probably need to be somewhere like Johor. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, cool. So by now, I would say you're probably most familiar with cleaning, caregiving. Is there any other verticals that you're very familiar with?
Not particularly currently. I know that there's, the handyman, specialized cleaning, renovation, etc. I haven't played with that just yet.
Okay. So knowing what you know right now, let's say tomorrow someone give you some capital. Okay, Paolo, you're fired from Helpling. You have to start a home services company from scratch. Which city would you pick? And which service would you start with?
City, like anywhere in the world?
Mhm.
I'd probably still go with care in Singapore if I'm being blunt. If it's my own business for me to kind of build something sustainable for myself. I need to reframe your question though. Do you want me to build a business that's going to, grow into a unicorn, or do you want me to build a business that's going to maybe net me a personal income of maybe like 50K a month?
Unicorn.
What are you asking? You want me to build a unicorn?
Yeah.
Germany.
Germany for which service?
Elderly care. Did you know that
Elderly.
German people, yeah, they migrate to Poland when they retire because there are no caregivers in Germany.
Really?
Yeah.
Wait, why Poland? Because do they have a better caregiver system?
Yeah. So, like for example, I was speaking with one of my caregivers, and she said that quite a few of her friends are saving up money to fly to Europe and then take a nursing scholarship so that they could be caregivers there in Poland. Yeah.
Wow, this is the first time I'm hearing this. Okay, it why do you think Germany does not have a caregiver system? That's crazy, no? Like the social welfare is quite good there.
I'm not sure. It might be a supply problem. Like that's why, because I know that Singapore, people are willing to spend. For example, I have some customers that spend like 5,000 saying a month with us. They could just hire a full timer instead, but they've been spending $5,000 for the past 10 months with us. Money is here, but the addressable market is still going to be limited. So why don't you just jump over to Europe instead?
Wow. Okay. So like so yesterday I talked to a caregiver company who has been in Singapore for like a couple of years, not a couple of years, I think decades. So she was telling me that so she's from Philippines and all her caregivers are from there. They are like nurses now doing caregiving job in Singapore. And she was telling me that she has a lot of friends who runs caregiving, like sourcing company from Singapore to other places, from Philippines to other places, to like let's say UAE, to Saudi. And she was telling me that the demand is way higher than supply from every single country.
It's not
And
a it's not a
but why do but it's still better than cleaning.
I would argue that yes, it's easier than being a cleaner.
Yeah. So why wouldn't all these cleaners level themselves up and then try to get a caregiver job?
I don't know. Maybe they just don't know about it yet.
So you think it's awareness problem?
I think it could be. For example, in Helpling, currently we have a specific pool of caregivers, and unanimously, they all agree that they would much prefer to be caregivers as opposed to cleaners.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then whenever I interview somebody and I let them know that they're going to be a caregiver, most of the top asked questions is, "Am I going to be a cleaner?" Also, sometimes. Yeah.
But it's kind of I would say probably 70-80% of the caregiving requests has some light cleaning help as part of the
Yeah,
job
but
scope.
then, you don't get, a crazy uncle that's like, hey, 3 hours, clean 6 bedrooms, right?
That's true.
As opposed to care, I think, yes, there are difficult parts of it, carrying them, cleaning them up, showering them, feeding them, preparing everything. So there's a lot of heavy lifting, shall we say, to be done. But what makes the job also fulfilling is the human part of it, building
Mm,
those relationships,
yeah.
right? So it means so much more to our caregivers when we tell them that, look, this customer has asked for you and they've extended for the rest of the year every single day with you, as opposed to, oh, this customer said you did a great job at cleaning. Okay, great. How
Yeah.
so the motivation aspect of it actually plays into increasing their level of performance without needing to performance manage them. They're incentivized to build those relationships with their customers naturally.
Right, right. I see, I see. Honestly, I thought that would be a very good career progression for those like HSS workers who are currently cleaners. If they're a top performer, you can kind of train them up and to be a caregiver. I think they will be super happy, right?
Yeah, yeah,
I don't know if you've seen the survey that I ran before with HSS cleaners, asking them whether they prefer a full-time maid job or being a HSS cleaner. Have you seen that one?
no. Give me the quick and dirty. What is it?
Okay, so we received reply from I think almost 200 of them. About 97% of them said they like this job better, and the top one reason is because they can choose what they want to eat. They can go home when they finish job. Number three reason I don't remember, but all reason boils down to the freedom part. And yeah, so now it feels like okay, it's like from full-time maid to part-time cleaner to then caregiver, or even they can become a hotel cleaner. Then they can make $8,000 a month. I think
Yeah,
that's pretty good for someone, that's better than a white collar job, no?
yeah. I think
Yeah.
on average, maybe like a fresh grad, assuming they're not in tech or finance,
Yeah.
like 6K is okay, right? Like
Yeah.
they'd be okay with 6K as a first time job.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
8K and then you're a hotel cleaner.
Yeah, I found one of the company who we were trying to partner in.
Got it.
I went to talk to them, and that they were telling me that now they source so they because they are basically a manpower agency, and then they only clean hotels and also well, how do you call those? Like a company sponsored housing,
Got it.
right? And then the hotel cleaners are making 7,000, 8,000. I was like, do you make any money? They're like, from local? No. That's how they can make 7 to 8,000. And in
Amazing.
return, they get quota. And then obviously that's where, right? Yeah. Do you think you can replicate this business model in Singapore somewhere else? Let's say
Like for care right now.
for the service business, right? Because let's say, okay, care, cleaning, or like just the Helpling's model running.
For sure.
Okay, why do you think other countries they couldn't really make it work?
Well, I think for one, we like that's a recurring theme in this podcast, right? Like there's always a gap in demand and supply.
Yeah,
How are you going to fix that supply problem with whatever country you go into? When you
yeah,
fix that, then you get another problem. How do you get the trust problem? So here in Singapore, it's safe. If someone commits a crime, you can, be assured that they will be punished. Technically, you're letting a stranger into your home to take care of your loved ones or to, clean your house. If I asked someone to do that in the Philippines, they'd be like, "Oh my God, hide everything," right? The cleaner's coming over, make sure
hide
everything
everything.
is yeah, make sure everything is kept. They're cleaning the house, but keep everything, right? So there's that trust factor of kind of building that brand in whatever country you're going to expand to. Same,
Yeah,
like for example, let's go to maybe another first world country like Japan,
yeah,
a developed country, sorry, like Japan. You're still going to have to build that trust factor with them. They're very
mm,
private people.
yeah,
Yeah. So that's, I think, one of the bigger obstacles. And that loops back to why I think that, the dominant player is ultimately going to be the one that is able to solve the chronic issue of offline service consistency, the execution.
I
Yep.
see, I see. Out of all these B2C companies that you've worked for, right? What do you think is the biggest difference? Let's say you've worked for multiple cleaning companies now. What do you think is the biggest difference in between Helpling versus those companies you worked for previously?
I mean, not just in the companies that I used to work for, but because we work with and see our competitors and have some idea of how they operate, right? It's often a trade off between how much do I want to make versus much, how good do I want my quality to be.
Mm,
Like you can't really
interesting.
have your cake and eat it, in my opinion. If you want to invest in quality, those are resources that you're throwing in that direction as opposed to, for example, marketing it. If you want to increase the revenue per head count that you have,
Yeah.
you have to squeeze them, and if you squeeze them, their quality will suffer. If you don't squeeze them, you lose revenue, but then your quality may or may not increase as well depending on your training, right? So there's a trade-off. Yeah.
How do you find the balance?
For me, I'm more risk averse as
Yeah.
opposed to super growth, hype growth at all costs.
Yeah.
Because if I'm able to build a stable business and keep the quality consistency, then that's fine by me, right?
Mm.
The less fires the way that I see it, the less fires I'm fighting
Mm-hmm.
because of my quality, I'm experiencing savings in other ways
Yeah.
that I would have spent if I'd squeezed these people.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Um, last question before we wrap up. Let's say you have a magic wand that you can fix one thing in the business tomorrow, immediately. What would it
Offline service. Happy
be?
customers equals no problems.
You're not
That's
the
it.
only one saying this.
Yeah.
Everyone's like training.
Yeah.
Um, except if they're smaller, they don't really have this problem.
Of course.
Everyone, as they scale, this is a training problem.
Yep.
Yeah. Good.
If I
Okay.
don't have customer problems, I don't need a big team.
And
Yeah.
the root cause for customer problem is offline.
Yep.
Yeah. Got it. Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights. I think I'm very happy and obviously always super happy to talk to you. I feel like each time I learn something, even if I know the business, but I feel like I learned something. Seriously. So thank you for your time, and I'll see you more often offline.
Sure.